Right, tonight we're talking about returning to school in September. The vote was very close. So we're going to be finishing equipment, and a lot of that's going to be talking about mobility equipment and manual handling type equipment on the 6th of September. But today we're going to concentrate on going back to school. Now, I know the Scottish schools have already gone back because I spoke to a Scottish physio this week. So the Scottish schools have already gone back. So what we discuss may or may not be relevant, but there are a couple of topics that we really need to talk about. And obviously, questions as always, please send the questions in because a lot of what we discuss is often based around the questions. And this is one particular webinar where I think the questions are going to decide how long we go on for, because it's not going to be the longest of all the webinars. So the three major areas we need to concentrate on. The first one is fatigue. Now, irrespective of how much physio and how much exercise and how much activity and whether you've got a hot tub or a swimming pool or anything else, going back to school after all these months is going to be extremely fatiguing. So we need to look at that. The second thing is, and this is a really big one, that is for those who started the type 2s and type 3s who started Spinraza anytime since last November. Obviously, being at home during lockdown, you have had much more time to do physio, standing, exercise, walking, CAFOs, orthotics, splints, sitting with your legs out straight, all these things that you've been able to build into a day, probably much more than in the normal situation when you're at school. And that is all going to change when you go back to school. So the level of physio-specific activity is going to reduce dramatically. And that is obviously going to have an effect, and we need to talk about that. And then the third thing, of course, is all the equipment that you've got at school or not got at school. So mobilizing your physios and your OTs to get things in place as soon as possible. So let's start with fatigue, because for those children who are not back at school, the first thing we really need to do, irrespective of it being school holidays, is get back into a routine of particularly bedtimes, getting up in the morning and thinking about this, because you cannot leave that until the night before you go back to school. This is going to finish the kids off. Their routines have changed, their times to bed have changed, their times to get up have changed. Even if you have been homeschooling, then you can fall out of bed. It's like working from home. You know, there's nothing better than falling out of bed at 10 to 8 and being ready for work at 8 o'clock. But when normally 6 week summer holidays is absolutely fine, it's not too much, it's gonna, you know, it's change of routine, it's absolutely fantastic. But this has been going on since March. I mean, lockdown was the weekend of the 21st, 22nd of March. So by the time the kids go back to school, it's going to be well over 5 months. We need to get back into routines. Otherwise, that first month, they're going to be so fatigued that they're going to be really, firstly, some of them are going to be quite revolting because they're going to be so tired. Secondly, they're going to find the function difficult. Things are going to get worse. You know, by half lunchtime at school, they're going to be flagging. The teacher's going to have difficulties in that respect. So much to catch up on. And then, of course, you know, you get to a Friday and you're not going to be able to enjoy the weekends off. Now, I accept there are many parents out there who are very worried about sending their kids back to school, who actually don't really want to send them to school because of the difficulties that you are going to encounter in terms of second waves and siblings catching stuff and parents catching stuff. And I understand that this is a very difficult and stressful time for everybody, but we have to plan as though we are going back to school. Even if the specific children are not going back to school, if there are different situations in different families, that's fine. But you really do need to plan as though these children are going back to school. And as I said, one of the things that they're going to find extremely difficult is just coping with a whole school day, as opposed to just being at home. Because it's not just a case of, I mean, parents, you'll be thinking, oh, well, they did all their schoolwork, they sent schoolwork, fantastic, they sent work home, it was 8 o'clock or 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and they finished at 3 as they normally do. But you don't have to travel to school. You don't have lunch breaks in as much as you have to move around. You don't have to go down a great long corridor to get to the toilet. You're not whizzing around at lunchtime, even though generally you would probably have been fairly active at home and doing quite a lot of stuff. But then at secondary school, you're changing classrooms, you're doing different things, you've got to sort, you've got to, you know, the children's mindset is also different of getting from A to B. And all right, most of them will have classroom assistants, learning support assistants, whatever, with them, but it's still a whole different mindset to falling out of bed or being hoisted out of bed or being lifted out of bed and doing your lessons from home. Also, you have the opportunity at home to sit in different chairs. If you don't want to sit in your wheelchair, you could sit on the settee and do some of your lessons. You could be sitting at a desk chair. Depends on your setup at home. But of course, at school, things are going to be different in that respect as well. You're in one chair usually most of the time, unless they're very little. They might come out of their wheelchair and go into a different chair. But you really need to start thinking about this fatigue, because we know with SMA fatigue is a big issue. And while some of the children who are on Spinraza do say that they're less fatigued, it's not in the same way that we've seen in even the case of salbutamol, where they have more energy. They may have more power, they may be able to keep going, but we need to think about how they're going to manage a school day. And that is part of physio, because you need, if fatigue is just getting through a normal day, then you're going to add exercise or activity or go back to hydro or have physio, and things are going to get difficult. And if you're thinking that hydro won't be open, hydro pools are being opened. If you've been having hydro, if you have hydro regularly, our hydro pool is open. Obviously, there are precautions, but there are chemicals in the hydro pools. And really the main issue for hydrotherapy is just being so close with somebody in the water. So that finding a mask that you can wear in the pool is going to prove a little bit difficult unless the physio stays on the edge and the parent goes in the water with the child. But generally, things should, the whole idea and what Boris wants is that school goes back to normal in September, and a full school day is a full school day, and that children will be as busy as they were before. So we need to think about how we're going to fit all the physio you were doing in lockdown into a school day, and that's probably not going to happen. So one of the things that we need to think about is how you can best encourage the children at the weekends, make sure that their orthotics, their calipers, their jackets, everything is ready to go when you return to school. That if they've been standing quite frequently at home where they don't mind standing, is that going to change because they don't want to stand in the classroom and be different from everybody else? So you're going to have to sort of think, maybe even write down how you have been managing their physio, their standing, their exercises, their activities while you've been in lockdown, and work that into a program that you will then be able to try and sort out with your physio and your classroom assistant or whoever it is that works with your child. So this is really important. And I'm sure parents that you have been thinking, or some of you will have been thinking about this whole concept of your points and your scores and how that affects the managed access agreement, and what happens if I've been putting so much into my child that their scores have really gone up. Quite a lot of the children will have been onto their 5th injection, and around the time of the 5th injection they should have had a reassessment, because that's what NICE have asked for. And at that assessment, lots of scores went up. You were busy with them, you had time to do activities, you could roll, you could give them the time to get from lying to sitting, you could use lots of equipment and standing and keep those contractures at bay. And how are we going to manage that when they're sitting all of the time at school? And if their scores don't go up next time, is that going to cause problems? If their scores go down, is that going to cause problems? Now, some of you may have had your assessments by video and not by face-to-face. And this has been discussed with NICE, and NICE are well aware that what you see on a video is not going to be the same as the assessment actually face-to-face with the physio or the person who does your scoring, and it could in some units be a doctor. So that NICE are aware that things have been a little crazy during lockdown, that if you weren't assessed face-to-face and you were done by video, your scores may look a little bit skew. There are some things that are really difficult to score. We've been scoring when the children come for injections, but the rooms and the beds that we were using were not really that easy for things like the hiney, where they have to swivel on their bottom. It's very hard to do that on a squishy hospital bed. So we've had some difficulties in being exact, but as I say, NICE are well aware that during lockdown things have got a bit skew. On the other hand, if we get to September, October, November to December, then you're getting face-to-face assessments. We want to make sure that they reflect all the positives and goods that you've been doing and not the negatives that are suddenly cropping up by a change. So how are we going to manage that? So you have to think about how much your child has been standing, and you probably need to discuss with some of them, not all of them, whether they're going to want to continue standing when they get to school. And if that is the case, then that has to be discussed with physio and the school, how they are going to get standing to the same degree that they were doing at home. An example was a little girl I saw last week who was standing 3 times a day. A couple of times in a standing frame, once in a CAFOs. Now, how are you going to fit that into a school day if she has been doing that quite extensively during lockdown? And that's something you need to think about and talk to the physio and the school about. So start making some lists and some plans of what you've been up to and what you would like carried on and what cannot be carried on. Maybe some of the kids do, as I say, do not want to continue standing at school. Maybe some of them will get the chance to do hydro. What do you want to be continued in the water? What have you been achieving? Maybe you've been doing some stepping, maybe you've been doing some walking, but you want to be continued even in the hydro pool. Is there a facility for your child to do some stepping? What other things have you been doing during lockdown? Have you been doing a lot of ball and peanut work? If there is not a ball or a peanut at school, is there any way of getting a ball or a peanut for school that could be continued? Because when the children come home, certainly for the first couple of months, and this is where the fatigue again kicks in, they're not going to want to do anything when they get home from school apart from crash out. So to actually ask them then to do some physio when they get home, unless it's just absolute static standing in a standing frame, may be just too much. So I would ask all parents to put a little plan of what they want, what they've been doing, what they're hoping to achieve in terms of physio, because sometimes, let's get real, physios are not always very experienced in SMA. Even those who work in SMA aren't that experienced in Spinraza. We don't know. Every child comes up with something different. So we don't know what we're expecting. So how can a community physio who sees 1 or 2 children with SMA know what they're expecting? So this needs a lot of cooperation with the physio, with the school, for you to get what you want, for the child to get what they want, because we've got to remember them, and how that's all going to fit together. Any questions, Marnie?
We've got a couple.
Yeah, let's have some questions.
Said their son has been thriving since homeschooling began, and they are debating actually continuing homeschooling post-COVID. However, they're wondering whether they get the same level of support in terms of physio and hydro if they were to homeschool.
In theory, they should get exactly the same level of physio and hydrotherapy, whether they're homeschooling or not, because the amount of input that you get is not based on school, it's based on physical need. So you are not assessed by whether you are going to school or not going to school. The physio can't say, oh, well, they're not at school, we're not going to do the physio. That's not the way it should work. If they have 2 or 3 children that they're coming to see at the school, obviously it does make it easier if it's the same trip to see 3 or 4 children than maybe come home to see you. It may well be that for ease, the physio may then say, can you come to the hospital or the centre or the clinic or wherever it is that they're based, rather than coming to you. So it may well be that if your physio saw your child at school previously, they may not come home, because, to be honest, home visits from a time perspective are very wasteful of time, because the physio is losing the time of traveling. Now, that's great for parents, but you have to appreciate that if everybody is suddenly homeschooled and the physio can't see 3 or 4 children in one visit to a school, that a lot of traveling, because I have done community physio and I know what the traveling is like, how much time it takes the occasional parent who actually wasn't even in, or the child wasn't in the mood or whatever. You can't do anything between visits. You know, you spend a lot of time in coffee shops sometimes when you're in the community, because, you know, there's no point in going back to base, and particularly if it's a wide geographical area, going back to your base and getting all your notes done. And you can't sit in Costa or Starbucks and do your notes, because these are not secure internet, so you will not get access. So you can maybe put something on an iPad just to remind yourself, but it's very difficult to be as productive in the community. And it may well be, if you decide to homeschool your child, which, you know, is fine, but don't forget the socialization aspect and seeing their mates and all the other stuff. But if you're going to homeschool, you should get exactly the same level of physio and hydro.
Okay, we've got another one saying that the school are wanting to review their child's EHCP to make sure it's COVID safe, and they're worried that they're going to try and stop physios and OTs visiting the school, and they're just asking for any advice.
I'm not sure that the school can stop them, but obviously that has to be negotiated. Now, it's true, if you are a physio and you work at 5 or 6 different schools and you see children in different clinics and different settings, that you are moving around, and the possibility then of spreading the virus from place to place may be considered to be a bigger risk. But all of us in hospital, all of us are in the medical world at the moment, are hyper aware of being safe. I wear 2 different levels of mask if I have a child who's got AGPs, aerosol generating procedures, which is cough assist, BiPAP, tracheostomy, suction. Then I have to wear a different mask, and some people are actually gowning up, and the people doing these things are sometimes visoring as well. But I know if I've got a child like that, I have to mask up, that we are wearing aprons and gloves for all the children. And some places are actually saying it's not necessary, that soap and water on your hands is better than gloves. So different, you know, infection control and infection policies vary from hospital to hospital. So I can understand schools are worried about the number of people coming in, but then they have to make Zoom facilities or video facilities available in the school so that the physios and OTs can do their job. Because if you are having your EHCP reviewed, they should not be reducing the amount of physio. Now, the big problem becomes, what does it say in your EHCP in the first place? Does it say, specify how often the physio comes? Does it specify whether it is your classroom assistant or your child's learning support assistant or whoever is doing the physio? And how is that person going to move on in terms of being taught what is current and what is relevant at the moment? And the other thing about community physio, which is really important, when you go to a neuromuscular service, a lot of what we do is assessing. We're doing your CHOP, or we're doing your Hammersmith, or we're doing your Heine, your Brook, your Vinyas, all these different assessments in different countries. It'll be different. Some people will do MFM, some people won't have any assessments because of the way the Spinraza is arranged. But it's not just about assessing, it's about treating, it's about progression, it's about what skills have they gained with Spinraza that need to be worked on. You know, if you're suddenly being able to do something that you weren't able to do before, let's capitalize on that. So you need a really good assessment from your community OT, or your community OT needs to be in touch with your neuromuscular physio and your community physio to see what skills you've gained, where you should be going, how you can enhance those skills, how you can prevent, because we know one of the big problems with nusinersen, when you get stronger, worse contractures, we've got more hip and knee contractures. How are we going to manage those? What splints are we going to do? What's feasible in the classroom? What needs to be done? So there is no justification just because the physio and OT are not going to go in face to face for saying that it should be reduced. If anything, it probably needs to be increased because of nusinersen, and also because of the teaching aspect, that everything that you've gained on nusinersen has to be capitalized on. But also, if you're not being seen face to face, then your child's classroom assistant or whoever, as I say, does their physio, helps them in the classroom, stands them, takes them to the toilet, all these things will need to be taught in a different way. So it may actually be that more time is needed, but that's not necessarily a positive, because that takes away from learning time.
Okay, we've got another one that the daughter uses a shared taxi to get to school, and they're not comfortable with this anymore. They don't think it's safe like it used to be, because of obviously COVID germs and things, but they're not really getting anywhere with local authority in terms of a private taxi. Again, have you got any advice?
I'm not sure how that works with transport. If the local authority are being difficult, I think that needs a consultant needs to step in on that one. My honest feeling is, if you are concerned, and that seems totally justifiable to me, I'm sure I would feel exactly the same, that if you don't know who you're getting in a taxi with or on a school bus with, that you are rightly concerned. But I can understand the authorities only have so many resources in terms of school buses and taxis at their disposal. So the question then is, could they ask you to take the child to school? Is that feasible? If it's not feasible, what are the alternatives? But if you're really concerned and the council cannot come up with solutions and you cannot get your child to school, then I think you need to discuss that either with your social worker, if you have one, with your care advisor from MD UK, or with your consultant and the neuromuscular team to get advice from them, because I think this is a really difficult area. I think you are right to be concerned if you are traveling with a child, but even more so on a school bus with children who are from very different situations, who may have siblings who are much older and even going to work, parents who are working. You don't know what precautions. Now, the question would be, will the children be wearing masks? But you can't always keep children wearing masks. And if you're on a school bus with a child who won't wear a mask, then what do you do? And if you have, how mandatory is it for the driver or some of the support workers on the bus to wear masks? It's like shops, isn't it? That you need to wear a mask to go into a shop, but yeah, it's not mandatory for shop staff to wear a mask. That's almost discretionary. So it's a very, very difficult situation. I think if you cannot get assurances that all the children will be masked, all the driver and the support workers will be masked, then I think you have a justifiable case for asking for a review of that.
Okay, we've got another one who their son is in high school, and the way the high school works, the teaching assistant rota is that you have a teaching assistant who's got a specialism in each subject. So you basically have a different teaching assistant per subject. However, they'd feel more comfortable with the same teaching assistant all day, but the school is unsure. Any advice on that?
You know, these are difficult because this has to be worked out with the individual school, but I can on the one hand understand the idea that it is specific to that particular subject. So if you've got a classroom assistant in high school and they've got no idea of math, they're not helping you. But surely that's what the teacher's for. The teacher's the one that's meant to be doing the teaching. The teaching assistant is not a teacher. You do not have a classroom assistant to be a teacher. That is learning support, and most of the kids do not need learning support. Yes, you need somebody to help you write, but it's your own brain that's doing things. And that is quite strange when you actually pick it apart, because as I say, these people are not supposed to be teaching you. The teacher's supposed to be teaching you. They're just there to make sure if your pen rolls on the floor or your mouse falls on the floor, or you need a piece of equipment that's not to hand or would cause chaos for you walking or moving your wheelchair to get it, that's what they're there for. If you need to go to the loo, if you're not feeling well, if you need to tilt in space every so often, if you need suction. But I'm not sure why the school feels that you need subject specific assistance to help teach you. That is the teacher's job. Nobody could have taught me maths. It wouldn't have mattered if I was sitting next to 6 maths whizzes. You know, it was the teacher's job to teach me. The teacher couldn't teach me, so how can these other people teach me? I do find that a little bit strange. I don't see quite how the school can justify saying, oh, you need somebody special to do history. No, you don't need somebody special to do history. You need the teacher to teach history, and you need the person sitting beside you to turn over the pages of the book in some cases, or to go and get some piece of resource, or help you with the computer or something. So no, I'm a little nonplussed by that one. On the surface, it seems like a good idea, but on the other hand, it makes you wonder what the teachers are doing.
Got to say, I was the same with maths. No one could have ever taught me maths.
Yeah. I'm very proud. I am very proud of my grade H in maths. Nobody had heard of one till I got it. I'm very proud of it.
We've got another question where there's 2 disabled children within the classroom, and the teaching assistant is there for them both. However, they feel more comfortable with the teacher to be one-to-one.
Okay, so the first thing you have to do is go to your EHCP and see if it specifies that, because I think that's something that's actually in your EHCP. If you're designated full-time assistant, then in theory the school should not be sharing an assistant between 2 of you. That's just them saving money. So that's a difficult one based on the school, because as I say, if both you and the other child have full-time assistant for one-to-one for the whole school day written into their EHCP, then you can ask for full-time assistant. And I actually think that is perfectly justifiable. The problem that you then have, you may have 2 assistants in the classroom. What if one goes sick? Will they just double up? I know more than one child who has 3 or 4 different assistants during a week. They'll have one for 2 days, and one in the morning, one in the afternoon, one somewhere else. And that becomes a problem as well. These are all things you need to sort out with your school. I think we had one awful situation of one poor little boy who one of the teaching assistants was absolutely horrible and never wanted to go to school on the day when that teaching assistant was there. So it is a fraught situation. It has to be somebody that I think the child gets on with, who they want to spend a whole day with, who's not going to be sitting on top of them the whole time. You know, most of our kids are incredibly bright and want to get on with things. They want somebody to fade into the background. On that basis, the teaching assistant may feel that they don't need to be there the whole time and they want something else to do, so we'll go to another child. Again, you need to look at the bubble system, because it may well be if those 2 children are in the same bubble and the teaching assistant is masked, then that is the best way to do it. That the 2 disabled children, or the 2 children that have got EHCPs or whatever, have to be in the same bubble, and it's the only way it's going to work. But I would have thought that that's the way the school were going to do it anyway.
Okay, we've got another question asking, from your opinion, what PPE should be used for personal care within school for type 2? The parent is struggling to get answers from anyone and the school have no idea, so we're asking her.
Well, It is difficult because, as I say, infection control in different places do not always give you the same answers. But the theory is, as I say, that this is spread by droplets. And as tiny as the virus is, and this is why there's a big fuss about masks and whether masks work and does a scarf help, the virus is minute. So what they're saying is it would go through some of these materials, but the virus can only move in a droplet of moisture. So that's what you've coughed up, sneezed out, breathed, you know, because when you breathe, you know this from in the winter, when you breathe outside, you've got steam coming out. Now, you may not be able to feel it when the weather outside is warmer than your breath, but you breathe, your air that comes out has got moisture in it. And this is how the virus travels, in droplets of moisture. And that's why even a basic mask can stop when you cough and when you sneeze, these droplets from being spread a long way. In theory, so it's when you're coughing, sneezing, suction, ventilation, but there is a suggestion, and this is from the children who have been admitted to hospital with COVID, that COVID can be found in stools, in your poo, in feces, in whatever you want to call it. And that in children, and particularly the ones who've had quite bad symptoms, who've been hospitalized, they will find that they do have it in their poo rather than in, you know, if you get a test, you get a swab and they'll stick a thingy at the back of your throat or back of your nose, and that's how they test it. But some of these children have had it in their poo. So if this is true, then they are going to need to be masked, gloved, and aproned for toileting procedures, as well as for any ventilatory procedures. Now, your normal bog standard blue mask with the elasticy bits that you can get off Amazon or in the chemist or whatever are not enough for those procedures. And you should have more tailored masks. Now, the problem then becomes that in hospital, we are fit tested. And that means we have to try different masks. And this is quite a procedure. Now, the vast majority of us can wear the basic white masks. They're quite hefty. They're actually incredibly comfortable and much nicer than those awful blue things which get very sweaty. They've got two elastics, and the bottom elastic comes over your head to make a seal underneath. And they're really quite tight fitting by the time you've put the little thing down. These are not these blue paper things. But not everybody actually suits those. And there are some that have got more pointy ones and different shapes, faces, and not everybody needs the same mask. So unless schools are going to have everybody fit tested, I don't know how this is going to work. But with aerosol generating procedures, and certainly if you are going to have to deal with changing soiled bums or dirty bums or whatever, you may want to speak to your education authority and see what is generally thought to be the practice, because it's going to be quite difficult to get the sort of masks that are used in hospital into schools.
Okay, I think that's it for questions for now.
Okay, so let's go back to where we were, and that was we were looking at what you've been doing at home and what you are going to continue to do at school. Now, the other thing that you're going to have to start thinking about is if you have splints and you have not seen anybody about the fit of your splints since before lockdown, this is something else you're going to have to think about. Foot splints, jackets, CAFOs, anything that you are wearing, now that we're really, you know, things are getting a little bit more open, then you need to be thinking about, are all these splints fitting? Most services are open now. I know our service has been open the whole way through because we feel that it's been an important service that has had to continue. Not everybody has. But we need to think about orthotics. We need to think about getting these splints right before we get back to school. We need to think about getting our CAFOs lengthened, or now that a lot of the children are on nusinersen, I'm going to be very controversial here and say, should more of our children be in CAFOs? More of our type 2s should be up. Maybe nusinersen has made a lot of stronger children. We have probably 5, 6 type 1s in CAFOs, some of them doing steps in them. So we need to be thinking about where we're going with nusinersen. I think one of the big issues, particularly for the type 2s, not so much for the type 3s, is that things have really changed since last November. We have kids who are now doing amazing things that they weren't doing before. We have borderline 1, 2s doing brilliant things. We have borderline 2, 3s doing brilliant things. We need to up the ante. We need to get the physios more involved. We need to be thinking about where we're going next. How many of these children should be standing? Now, yeah, I'm going to be controversial. Yeah, all right, fine, Great Ormond can do that, blah, blah, blah. That's not true. If we can do it, anybody can do it. It's just a will to actually get these children moving to where they should be. Now, I know that many therapists do not believe that we are right, and that is perfectly right. You know, we work for our kids, we don't work for the whole country's kids, and they don't agree with putting the kids in CAFOs. They don't agree with all this standing. They'd rather have the kids in standing frames. They're not going to do the things that we do, not only because we've got an excellent orthotic company and maybe they don't, but it's a different way of doing things. And I would say, and I totally agree, there are very, very few of our type 2s who get CAFOs when they are young and keep going with them into teenage. And I can probably count on fingers and toes in the last 5 years how many have continued using CAFOs till they're quite old. Now, the thing obviously is CAFOs and spinal surgery don't always go together, but there are children who've had spinal surgery who still continue to stand in CAFOs or even take some steps in CAFOs. So I think we've got a whole different set of possibilities now with stronger children. We do know that we haven't, and we're not going to stop the children getting scoliosis just because they're on nusinersen. We're not going to stop them getting contractures just because they're on nusinersen. On the contrary, we're probably going to get worse contractures because the muscle imbalance is going to get worse. So this is something we have to work even harder with. But the possibilities are much greater for the borderline children. That's borderline 1, 2 and the borderline 2, 3s. We need to get these borderline 2, 3s up on their feet, get them some hip joints, get them some activity, get them moving, because I think we've only seen the start of things. Obviously now risdiplam has been approved by the FDA. We're going to see big changes probably coming, and hopefully NICE will be a little bit more open about who gets risdiplam and not follow with nusinersen, but we'll have to wait and see. But we need to keep thinking that these kids have got many more possibilities than their predecessors, that yes, many people, young people and adults will get either nusinersen or risdiplam or other drugs to come. But let's make sure that all those amazing things that you have done during lockdown are continued. And if you haven't been doing them during lockdown, get started. But we do need to try and maintain these levels of activity. It's not just about numbers. It's not just about NICE. It's not just about managed access agreements. It's about being at the best physical point that you can be based on the drugs that you are taking. So now we need to get onto our physios and OTs and make sure that the equipment that we left in school is still going to fit, or if we're moving to secondary school, that we have all the equipment that we need in place. Now, obviously, if your child spends a lot of their time in one wheelchair in school, then school is accessible. That's absolutely fine. You don't foresee any problems, absolutely fine. But if there are issues, then they need to be addressed now and not hopefully when the child gets to school, because there is nothing worse than having a whole term of going backwards and forwards trying to get things sorted. It gets really difficult for the child, really difficult for the school, and you end up being pig in the middle, which is not an ideal place to be. Any questions, Marnie?
Yeah, we've got a couple. Is there physio workshops online that our local physio who comes into the school could join?
Apart from what we do here, there is something called Open Tact. I must be honest and say I don't think there's an awful lot on Open Tact at the moment. A lot of what is on Open Tact is just assessment. But Open Tact is something that was set up with Newcastle Neuromuscular Service and MD UK. It's done through MD UK. It's got its own website, Open Tact. It's only accessible if you have an nhs.net or a hospital email address. So if you are not working in hospital, if you're working in the community, you'll have an nhs.net address, but it does not then become accessible to classroom assistants and other people. But there is stuff on there about SMA. We used to run workshops. We used to run 2-day practical management workshops. Unfortunately, of course, we had to cancel the one that was on the 1st of June or around June time. And at the moment, even at Great Ormond Street, although we're opening up, we can't still have more than 6 people in a room together for a meeting. So we cannot do a hands-on practical course. But most neuromuscular physios are very open to working with community physios to help them. Now, what we have been doing, and actually this is one of the big positives from lockdown, is we have been inviting our physios to join us on Zoom during an assessment. And this is something that obviously we never thought about doing before. Physios very often find it very difficult to join every single child on their hospital visit, because even if they're, in a London hospital, it still is time out to come and visit the hospital, spend time and then go back. It can often be a whole morning. Whereas this way, they can join us for the hour and a half that we're assessing them and still see 2 other children that morning. So this may be something that we should be asking neuromuscular physios and community physios to get together on. So if we have children now coming for assessment, more so the little ones, but sometimes the children who things are changing are going into CAFOs or life generally is changing for whatever reason, then we invite the physio to join. We usually use an iPad because somebody can move it around. It's a bit more portable than a laptop. And we send them a Zoom link and they come and join us and can see what we're getting up to. And I think that's probably a really good way of improving knowledge with community physios. And that's something new. And I think that should continue even well after lockdown. And it'll be a really, really lovely way for community physios to upskill, because we'll be able to talk through what we're doing, why we're doing it, what we're planning, and being able to work with the child in the sight of the community physio. So I think that's something very positive and should be encouraged around the country.
Okay, we've got another one, which is more of a statement rather than a question, but
yeah,
I thought you could maybe cover this a little bit. They live in Scotland, and with schools already going back, one of the local schools for children with additional support needs have so far restricted all professionals other than essential teaching and support staff. This means that OTs, physios, SALT and wheelchair clinics are not permitted into the school.
Well, then you're going to have to start Zooming. Now, you can't Zoom a wheelchair clinic. If it's very rare, as far as I know, but I don't, because I haven't been in the school system for a long time. Obviously, if the child's the only child in the school, you're not going to have a whole wheelchair clinic in the school. If you have a big special needs school, then it's obviously useful for the wheelchair service to come and do a wheelchair clinic in a big special needs school. But if you're one of 2 or 3 children in the school, and you may even come under different boroughs or different wheelchair services, that's not going to happen. So for wheelchair services in England, I can't see that that would be an issue. But it is difficult for physios, OTs and speech therapists. Now, certainly it is not common for type 2 and type 3 to have speech therapy, but certainly for type 1, many of our children are having speech therapy. And again, then they have to set up Zoom links. It's not impossible. It doesn't have to be Zoom. There are other things. There are Microsoft Teams. Now, I think a lot of schools are using Microsoft Teams. Personally, I find it almost impossible to use Microsoft Teams. I find it really difficult and would love a tutorial on Microsoft Teams, but it's there, it's available, and it should be being used. And if the school are refusing to allow these people in, then they should be making sure that the therapists are in touch with the school via Zoom links. It's really, really crucial not to lose these links. It's easy to say, oh, they can't come in. Bypass that with a Zoom link. It's really bog standard, basic, not rocket science. That's how it has to be done.
I must say I'm the same with Microsoft Teams. Zoom, it's fine. Teams is just...
Let's get real. I am totally zoomed out sometimes. I spend a day on the phone, on a computer, doing tons of admin. Admin's actually got crazier since lockdown because the clinics have to be done one by one, which is madness. You know, clinics should be booked through a central booking system. We shouldn't have to be doing this, but we are. But, you know, there are days when I leave the hospital and think, I do not want to see another computer. I want to see people. I mean, we were very lucky that we had the opportunity right through to see children, that children were coming in for their injections, children were coming in for orthotic clinics. We had probably, since lockdown, had 6 new SMAs come for assessment, which had to be done because we needed to get them onto nusinersen. So that was something where we could again do face-to-face. But, you know, we did not sign up as physios or OTs or speech therapists to work with computers. That is not what we did. And it's really hard for a lot of people. Some people love the Zoom, love the working from home, love doing everything over a computer. Personally, I like nothing better than being in a room with a child, with a family, and actually working together on the physio. And it's very variable, I agree, but it's horrible. There are times when I just never want to see another computer and only want to see children. But I think we have to take it for what it is and use all the technology that we can while it's available, and work around the situation. It's no good us all complaining constantly that this doesn't work and that doesn't work and this is obstructive and this one can't do this. You know, we've got the technology, we've got the possibility. As I say, you know, the ability now to have our physios, our community physios, join us for assessments on a regular basis is going to be superb. I mean, I just think that is a brilliant way of doing things, and that's come out of lockdown. So let's take all the positives that have happened, the ability to have done this amazing amount of physio and work over the last 6 months, and let's capitalize on it, because we can moan forever, we can shield forever, we can worry about masks forever, but we have to get back into the real world. We don't know who's carrying what, and let's get real, COVID isn't the only bug out there. It is an awful one, but not a lot of the children are catching it. I have not yet, and that's me. You know, please tell me if you've heard differently. I have not yet heard of an English or Welsh, possibly not even Scottish or Irish, child with SMA having caught COVID. So we have been amazing at keeping it away. And I can understand parents saying, well, that's because we've been isolating. But you haven't been completely isolated, and particularly kids who've been in the hospitals. And I remember very early on in COVID that on this group, there was a parent who said, is it safe to go to hospital? Well, yes, it's been incredibly safe. We have been incredibly careful with the children. You know, when we put on these special masks, it's not the children only that we're trying to protect, because those masks go both ways. What we don't want in hospital is all the staff going off sick, because then there won't be anybody there. So a lot of the protection in hospital, I hate to be rude and say, is not only for your benefits, it's for ours too. If my whole team go down, that's one thing. If the whole of the respiratory physio team went down sick, we'd be in big poo. You know, so we have to protect the staff. We can't have all the doctors going off sick. We can't have all the intensive care staff going off sick. So it's not just about protecting children. What about protecting the teachers? What about protecting the support staff? We have to think about this on both sides. We need our teachers in school, and therefore we've got to protect them too. So we have to think this is not just about the children. I agree. I wouldn't want my child in your situation traveling with another child in a taxi, not if they're going to be sitting right close to each other. If you have a minibus and one can be at the front, one can be at the back, well, that's absolutely fine. But you're going to pack 12 children on a 12-seater minibus. No, I wouldn't want my child there either. But we have to be a little bit flexible. We have to think, where are the children who've caught COVID? How have we been protecting? Not just by shielding. Not just by shielding, and not every child has had a mask on the whole time. We've all been in shops and not everybody's been masked. I have travelled by tube from day one, from where I live into King's Cross. And I have even shouted at people on the tube who haven't been wearing masks and told them not to sit near me. Because I have been wearing face coverings from the beginning, but I tell people, don't sit there. I don't want you sitting there. And surprisingly enough, they do move. Nobody's actually ever refused. But, you know, we have to think. I have been out there the whole time. So far, and I do have a wooden table here, touch wood, I haven't caught anything. That is so far, but we're talking about nearly 6 months that I have been traveling by tube. So not everybody out there is catching everything going. I think we've got to take a big deep breath and relax a little bit. I can understand the panic. I seriously can understand the panic, but there are other bugs out there, and you didn't go out with masks to stop you getting flu and other bugs prior to COVID. So we need to be a little bit more relaxed and to think, not only are we protecting our children, but we've got to protect the teachers and all the other people as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. That it's about protecting everyone. And that's why all these policies will be brought into place with schools, is to protect everyone, not just the child. I think that is very important to remember. We've got another question, and we have covered this in past.
It's fine. Let's have a listen.
This is in terms of for Scotland again. In Scotland, how do you go about finding a private neuromuscular physiotherapist?
The biggest problem with Scotland is it's very spread out. I mean, you have a small population in a country probably as big as England. To find a private neuromuscular physio is difficult because you're not going to have a lot of neuromuscular physios. What you need to do is one of two things. You need to contact whoever the private physio is and ask them what experience they've got, or the people who will know best who has experience is your neuromuscular centre. So there's obviously a centre in Edinburgh, a centre in Glasgow, and a centre in Inverness or Aberdeen, I think. So there are physios in those centres, and they will know who has the experience. But obviously, you know, you are very spread out. You've got Ayrshire, you've got Dumfries, you've got Dundee, you know, St Andrews, you've got all the West Coast. This is not just about the three major cities. So it's going to be quite hard. The other thing is, I mean, I saw a little girl with SMA last week who has a private physio. And it was pretty obvious from what Mum said she was doing, she knew nothing about SMA. And I said to Mum, has she ever seen another child with SMA? And Mum said no. And what worried me about that was not that she'd never seen a child with SMA, but she obviously wasn't going anywhere to ask for advice either, because she was doing a lot of things that I was not particularly impressed with. And it's very hard for parents when you are paying for a physio that you hope knows what they're doing, and then somebody like horrible like me comes along and says, well, actually, that's rubbish, or no, they shouldn't be doing this, or actually, I don't want them sitting in great long calipers because it's overstretching their hamstrings, or no, why are they doing that? It's not useful. We had one mum who was using that sling system for walking. Luckily, she sent us the videos of him. And that explained exactly why he was getting increasing hip flexion contractures, because when you're just dangling, you are using hip flexors. When you're standing, you have to use a lot of hip muscles. But when you're dangling from these slings that some of these private physios walk them in, they're doing more harm than good. It looks great. Oh, look, my child's walking. But actually, no, what you're doing is getting hip flexion contractures. So if you're going to employ a private physio, first you want to know what experience they've got. And if they don't have a lot, then they have to be prepared to hook up with a neuromuscular physio who can help them. Because, you know, I do not mind. We have had quite a lot of private physios come on our face-to-face course, and that's really good. And we have a couple of private physios in the Southeast who are in regular contact with us. And we know that the more they're seeing, the better it is for parents. Why would we be difficult about it? We work in the health service, they work in private. If that's what parents want, it's really incumbent upon us as experienced physios to help those physios, not just say, well, you're private, you should know what you're doing. It's not the way it works. We're there for everybody. We all have to work together for the good of the child. Not think I'm NHS, you're private, you're being paid for this, I'm not. Because we're all being paid ultimately. And it's parental choice. So what we're teaching at Great Ormond Street is there for private physios as well as NHS ones.
Okay, great. We've got another one. There's been a suggestion to have their son's arm at full extension whilst writing to prevent contractures.
What?
But how would they go about supporting that arm?
You can't write in full extension. Nobody writes in full extension. You can't support the arm unless you have a table up to here. No, I've never heard anything quite that crazy for a little while. You need a normal writing position, and you're not going to get contractures from writing. Yes, your hand is in this position, but if you're doing other things and you're doing exercise and you're doing stretches and you're doing activities, writing is not a power movement. One of the problems of contractures, when you've got one muscle much stronger than the other, is because they're doing power movements. If you are sitting using your hip flexors, if you are doing things using your hip flexors, it's generating power that is then causing a bigger difference between. When you're writing, you are not, it's not like screwing something or turning something or using this as a power movement. The other thing is that people don't realize about arms. And again, whoever has suggested this doesn't understand, and this is actually quite sad. There are two muscles, the biceps here, this chunky one here, and brachioradialis, which is this one here. Now, any man watching this will be flexing his biceps and showing how big it is and showing off. And basically, that is not the muscle that these children use. So while this is the muscle that bends the elbow, and if you resist bending the elbow, you can see the tendon here, and it goes all the way up and it splits at the top and it goes around the back and wherever. That's besides the point. That's the bodybuilder, that's this one. But we're not doing that the whole time. What are we doing that's going to build up that muscle? So the one that these children use, all of you use, you're using it, Marnie, much more than you use anything else, is this one, brachioradialis. And it starts up here and it goes across your elbow, and the power bit of it, if I can show you, if I can make it stand up, it's there, it's that one. And that is the power movement. And that's what most people do. You say to somebody, take your hand to your mouth, and they'll do it that way. They don't do it that way, they do it that way. And that is because as you bend, your hand wants to come over. But when you're writing, you shouldn't be using much muscle at all. It's not going to cause contractures. So to have your arm out there is not a functional position. It's going to cause a lot of stress on your shoulder and a lot of stress over your elbow. And you'll actually be using brachioradialis more to try and stabilize your arm. So a normal writing position sounds a lot more sensible with a lot more active supination, games, activities, and things that are going to work the arms at other times and not when you're writing. So no, I don't tend to agree with that one at all, I'm afraid.
Okay, we've got another one saying sitting down at school already worries me, and standing is time consuming out of lessons. What can be done in the chair for legs?
There's a big issue about this because it's very age dependent. In secondary school, most children do not want to stand because they don't want to be different from their peers. They don't want to be standing up for a lesson where everybody else is sitting down, and I understand that. But it's really age dependent, it's activity dependent, it's lesson dependent, and it's very much a case of what are you standing in and how are you getting into it. My personal feeling, and we talked about this when we talked about equipment, I do not like static standing frames. I don't actually think that children should be in them for long periods. I think half an hour, 45 minutes, bit of a stretch, bit of an upright position, change of posture in the wheelchair, fine. But then either you're standing in CAFOs or you're in a dynamic stander and are actually pushing. Dynamic stands are the one with the big wheels, and you should be pushing. Now, if you can be in a dynamic stander at school, where you can move around in the classroom, where you can be a little bit more mobile, and if you're comfortable, we have children who can stand in those for up to an hour, then that is possibly from break, morning break to lunchtime, and then it's not such a big palaver to get into it and to get out of it. So if you can plan the day around it so that if you went in from morning break until lunchtime, if it was comfortable enough and functional enough and you could do the right activities, then you can plan how you're standing around a timetable. One of the big issues with standing frames is they're not mobile, or you have to move the whole thing around the room, and they're bulky. But the dynamic standers, particularly for smaller children, and the space has to be there in the classroom. That's the other thing, because you've got to get into them, you've got to get out of them, and you've got to ideally move around in them. Now, the other thing about standers is they don't all have an attached desk or table, so you have to get it into the right place. And then that has to be the right height, because if you're standing, then your desk is not at the right height. So that's another problem. So there are considerations, but this is what the physio and the OT should be doing. And if they can't do it face to face because the school won't let them in, they're going to have to do it by Zoom and discuss it. Now, Zoom doesn't have to be one-to-one. There can be 100 people on a Zoom meeting. It can be done from inside the classroom. It can be done with the child there or before the child gets there. So again, you've got to think about all the standing. Do they have CAFOs? Do they stand? Do they need gaiters in their standing frame? Is there a better standing frame that's easier to get into? Is there a mechanical one? Is there any justification in having a standing wheelchair? Is this a child who would justify the use of a standing wheelchair? Now, to be honest, standing wheelchairs, when they first came out, everybody was going berserk and everybody wanted a standing wheelchair. And to be honest, a lot of them were a waste of time and a big waste of money, because if you got a £25,000 standing wheelchair and you stood 3 times, you can't justify spending that sort of money. If you seriously think you are going to stand regularly, then you maybe need to be thinking about a standing wheelchair. That's particularly true of older children, but it may be true of the younger ones as well.
Okay, we've got another one asking for any suggestions on grasping pens.
Grasping pens?
I'm guessing like the pens with like the
special grips.
Yeah, that's what I'm guessing.
What does it, how's the question actually worded, Marnie?
Just asking for ideas on grasping pens.
There are actually, there are several catalogues that will have this sort of equipment in. Now, there used to be one called Nottingham Rehab, and they're not called that anymore, who used to do a lot of different types of pens and different styles, the ones with a round grip that you could actually get a pen, and a crayon that had a ball, you know, was ball shaped, so that you could do a gross grasp, so that you didn't have to do a tiny pencil one. You can get triangles, you can get round things, you can even use pipe lagging with the very narrow bore and put your pen in that. That's quite a nice one, and we use that a lot, or used to use that a lot, for cutlery. But there are catalogues, there are things, I don't know, I've never looked on Amazon for pens, but there is quite a lot of stuff around, quite a lot of teachers should be aware of that, of all the different stuff. It's like those lovely scissors with the round, instead of having the finger holes, that have the round plastic bar that make it really easy to use scissors. So those are all available. You just need to hunt them down from catalogues. But as I say, there's quite a nice one where it's a ball, so that you can grasp it like that and write that way instead of having to write this way. So those all exist. And if you haven't got one, then get a squishy ball, a relatively small one, poke a hole through. I mean, this is all Blue Peter stuff. Poke a hole through and stick the pen in, and then you can do it that way. So you can be inventive as well. You don't have to wait until you find things in a catalogue. If you find a solution, go and make it. And that's quite good fun, and very often is probably the way equipment's ever developed. But there are those little squishy balls, probably about that size, that you buy in the pound shops and those, you know, little toy shops and the shops that sell everything. Chop a hole through the middle, get an apple core or something, chop a hole through the middle and stick your pen in, and those are much, much easier to hold.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit as well, because when I was at school, which I started school 20 years ago, so I'm sure things
ago. It wasn't that long
20 years ago, legit. And I always found the grippers too big. I really struggled, and I found they made the pens too heavy. So what we ended up doing was moulding one out of blue tack around the pens, and that was really effective. So if you are struggling to find one that your child can use, because they are big, and well, I'm saying it, they were big when I was looking at them. I would definitely recommend trying blue tack. That's really
I would suggest maybe rather than blue tack, that can get quite sticky and sweaty hands, to use Play-Doh.
Yeah.
And the only problem, as I say, with blue tack is it does get very sticky and sweaty hands.
Yeah, I can't fully remember. I mean, I was only 5, but I just remember making one ourselves, because all the grippers were just too big for my hands. So making it yourself can also be very effective.
So I think there are ways that you can sort of get your Blue Peter hat on and do all this sort of thing. Yeah. But again, if you look for stuff, you may be able to reproduce it.
I'll also say the pens that I always found best to write with were always the Bic biros as well. So if your child's struggling with handwriting pens, I do find biros a lot easier, and I know often schools prefer children to use the handwriting pens, but they should really let you try different pens if your child is struggling. And I did find the Bic pens always the easiest to hold and the easiest to write with, so that's always a suggestion of mine as well.
Any more questions, Marnie?
Yeah, we have got, what can help support head tiredness? I don't want bits in the chair, as the tiredness is only in the last hour of school, but my daughter leans her head on her hand, which worries me about her spine.
There's lots of problems with this. One of the biggest problems with this is, in effect, you've lost a hand. Because if you're doing this, you've only got one hand left. And if you're trying to drive your wheelchair and your hand there, you know, let's hope it's the right hand. But it does mean that you are constantly losing one hand for the end of the day. The main issue is why they're fatiguing towards the end of the day. And it may be that if you're considering it, it may be worth speaking to your doctor about salbutamol. It may be something that would help for that last hour for the fatigue, because one of the things that people do say about salbutamol is it gives them that extra bit of energy and they can keep going for longer. And if salbutamol is well spaced during the day, it may well give her that boost that she needs at the end of the day. The other thing is you may not want extra support in the wheelchair, but does it have tilt in space? Can she be tilted, and can the desk be raised for that last part of the day? Is it possible that, you know, if she's constantly looking down, that is a problem and everything needs raising on her desk? That she needs her desk higher, she needs her laptop higher, so that instead of looking down all the time, she's actually looking up. And in fact, when you get a workplace assessment, you are not supposed to be looking down. You are actually supposed to be slightly looking up when you are using a computer. And this is one of the big problems that we have with schools, is that nobody will do a workplace assessment on a child. We would not put up as adults, if we were office workers, with what children put up with at school. And your OT should actually be involved in this one, because if your child is fatiguing towards the end of the day, then they are not set up properly. Everything sounds as though it needs to be raised a bit so that she could rest her head and have a good view of what's going on. So instead of trying to keep her head from flopping, that she's got everything set at a better height. The only alternative to a hand then becomes a collar, and that's not really what you want. So that while you say you don't want bits and pieces and you're worried about the leaning, then what you may need is thoracic supports here, because if her trunk's better supported, it may be that her head is better. And the other thing you may think about is, if she is not jacketed, is this something that somebody needs to be looking at? Because when your trunk is well supported, and again, it's no good saying we don't want bits in the chair if that's what she needs. When your trunk is really well supported, it's much easier to manage your head. And that has to be looked at. So your physio and OT need to get together. Unfortunately, it may be that you're at a school where they won't allow them in. Get this set up on Zoom with the teachers and see what's going on, because it sounds to me like this needs a bit of concerted effort to see whether she actually needs everything changing a little bit, whether whatever she's using at school needs to be a bit higher, a table needs to be a bit higher. Now, I know OTs are very into sloping desks and I'm not, but you don't know until you try. So I think this sounds like we need some work between physio, OT and school to get this sorted out, because that is not, as you say, it's really quite a difficult position. It's always to the same side. You can get tightness in the neck. You can start pulling one way, and then you do need thoracic supports in the chair, whether you want bits in the chair or not. Some of the thoracic supports can be moved out of the way at other times. So they just get brought in from the back of the chair for those times when she's sloppy and needs some more support. The other thing is, you could get your physio doing a bit of PNF with her. PNF, if I tell you it's proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, just remember PNF. We do use a lot of PNF on heads. It's a very specific technique of muscle strengthening. I think it's very effective. I love it, but we do use it. We have had quite a lot of success with some SMA heads using PNF, but it has to be done quite regularly, and the kids can help by doing some of the work themselves. So that is a technique that your physio needs to work with you on.
Would one of those kind of like cozy neck pillows help, do you think? Or are they
Well, the only problem with those is it does tend you to encourage you still to go to one side, Marnie. So those neck pillows, it would have to be really high and in effect almost a collar, because if you think about the neck pillows, they still encourage you to lean to one side.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, we've got a few more questions. Do you think standing in school time is a good idea?
The question is not whether it's a good idea, but is it the only time that the child has to stand? If it's standing in school or not standing at all, then the answer is, of course, yes. Some children even stand for their breakfast and then go to school and stand when they come home in the evening. It doesn't work for every family, but I know there are children who literally get up in the morning, go into the stand and have their breakfast in standing. Go off to school, don't stand at all in school, come home and do an hour standing at home. But it has to work for you, your child, school, and everything else. I mean, if you've got one child and that you can get them standing for their breakfast, but if you're trying to get 4 kids out the door in the morning, it may not be that putting them in a standing frame is a good idea. It has to be very individual. But if it's standing at school or not standing at all, absolutely has to be standing at school. But I would not force a child to stand at school if they find it embarrassing because they're the only one standing. If there are activities where it's playtime and everybody's up sand trays and water trays and everybody's standing up or rushing around or changing position, fine. If it's art or even science where you're up on those stools and they're standing instead of being up on one of those awful science stools that we all used to fall off. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I'd rather have had a wheelchair where the seat went up than perch on those blooming awful stools. I could never climb up onto them anyway, I was too small. But it really is where it fits in at school. I can understand that any child not wanting to be the only one standing in the classroom. So again, maybe the teachers ought to think about how that can be fitted in to stop them feeling left out or the only one that's doing it.
Okay, we've got another one which is slightly off topic, but I'm going to ask it anyway because it's quite a good question. Is what exercise ball would you recommend for a 10-year-old with type 3 who has got a strong core?
Medicine ball, I think. I've got a type 3 who's got a strong core, sounds stronger than me. We're presumably talking therapy ball and not medicine ball. Schools occasionally have balls. What size? It depends on how tall your 10-year-old is. I was quite tall at 10 and then I stopped. I think I was probably about the same height as 10 as I am now. So it's the ideal therapy ball you can sit on and have your feet on the floor so that, again, you're sort of at a 90-90, which is the perfect sitting position. The bog standard ball that you will get in most shops, so that would include Tiger and IKEA and Sainsbury's and whoever wants to sell balls, would be 65 centimeters. Now, if that works, and that's diameter, if that works, that's absolutely fine. There is a chain of sports shops. I only know it because I happened to come across it in Uxbridge, but I don't know where else they are, that had different sizes. And it's the only time I've ever been anywhere where I've seen different size balls actually on sale. But I would have thought your bog standard ball that I use, which is the normal buy in the shops, I'm not sure where mine came from. I think it did come from Tiger or something, and I know I did get one once upon a time from Sainsbury's, is the normal 65 centimeters. And if they're a reasonably sized 10-year-old size type 3, then I would just go for that one. But as I say, if they're a really strong and they've got a brilliant core, get them a medicine ball and get some work with that. Somebody was telling me, a physio recently was telling me they work with a medicine ball, which I thought was a little bit strenuous, and it depends on the size and the weight of the medicine ball, but you never know. It depends on your type 3, how active they are and what sort of exercise they like doing. But a normal bog standard ball sounds about the right height. And if it's too big, just don't put so much air in. So it'll squish down a bit when you sit on it.
Okay, we've got another question, in that their daughter's hips hurt a lot. And during lockdown, she's been able to get her out of her chair more, which means her hip pain has been less. However, the school are reluctant to do as much transferring as she has been doing at home due to missing amount of lessons. Any recommendations for that?
I suppose it depends on what the school have got in terms of facilities, because one of the things that may be possible to get her out of her chair is it depends on the hoisting system. Is there a hoist in the classroom? Do they have to only go to the special physio room? Is there only a hoist in the toilet? Because if there's a portable hoist and they can stand, then maybe they could stand in a standing sling and dangle around the classroom. That may not be an option. It may be too big. Again, a standing wheelchair may be an option. Getting into a standing frame may be an option if getting out of the wheelchair for a length of time. Now, the question said, getting out of the wheelchair helped their hips, but getting out to where? Onto a bed, onto the floor, into a standing frame. So I don't know where you're getting out into to help the hip pain. But I can understand when schools say things like it's difficult because it's time consuming, but there are breaks. And as I say, if it's into a standing frame, it could be from one break to the next, if they will tolerate being in a standing frame that long. Tilt tables, which can take the pressure off because you can alter the angles very quickly. The trouble is they're very bulky when they're lying down and you have to get onto them. And they're not that much better to actually wheel around. But again, it's the age of the child. Have they had spinal surgery? What facilities have the school got? It's really, really very difficult one to answer. But I do understand when the schools say it is time consuming. But break times are there. You know, you go in the morning, you have a mid-morning break, you have a lunch break, you have an afternoon break. Try and fit it around the breaks if they can stand from one break to the next. Or maybe the school can be flexible enough to actually change some break times for that class to allow them to be out of the chair for maybe a shorter period and not be too disruptive. Again, it'll depend on age and the school timetable.
Yeah, and I guess if it's from chair to bed and it's laying down, I know from my experience getting a chair that reclines and bringing the footrests up really helped my hip pain. It's probably very expensive and not a short-term solution.
A recline chair is fine, Molly. The only problem is in a classroom, they take up quite a lot of space. So you've got to have room in the classroom to actually do it. Because I remember when we first moved to Great Ormond Street, we used to have a young man with type 1 who was one of our very best type 1s and one of our first ever type 1, true type 1 to transition to adult services. And they moved us to a clinic where there was no room for him to actually spread out. And he used to like to virtually lie down in his wheelchair every 20 to 30 minutes. And he couldn't do that. The waiting room was too small. And that was really quite interesting, that there wasn't enough room in the waiting room and he had to go into the sort of lift lobby to lie down. And they actually then moved the clinics because they realized these big electric wheelchairs do not fit into small spaces. So again, it may be dependent on the size of the classroom, but certainly a fully reclining wheelchair may well be the answer, and a good answer.
So it's a big time saver as well, because you're not having to include the hoisting and the transferring in the time. And I can only speak from experience. It made a huge difference to me.
No, it's absolutely fine, but you do have to have the space to do it.
Yeah, you do. You definitely do. They aren't the smallest things. I think we are just about done for questions. Yeah.
I think we're probably just about done. That was a lot longer than I was anticipating. Again, when it comes to going back to school, you do need to think that the school also have a job to do, and that is to teach. They have to protect their teachers and their support staff. And we need to work together in this. The neuromuscular physios need to work with the community physios. The schools need to get hooked up on Zoom or Microsoft Teams. They've been doing it for lessons all during lockdown, so they can't say they can't do it for the physios and OTs. So you really need to get everybody together, get it sorted out, and hopefully everybody will get back to school healthy and safe in September. And if your child is not going back to school, keep going with what you're doing. And good luck to you, because it's probably actually quite a tough decision. It sounds like an easy one, but I know a lot of parents have really struggled to keep going with the schooling. So good luck to all of you. We'll see you on the 6th of September.
Yes, the 6th, and we will be doing part 2 of
Of
the
equipment.
equipment, don't we?
Lovely. Thanks a million, Marnie. Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Bye.